welcome. I'd like to hand over to you and please take it away.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Andy. So I'm just going to pull up, if I may, my presentation, but I'm also just going to hang on maybe just for another minute or so while we see. I see there are people still joining. So if we just hang on another minute or so, just to allow any late stragglers. There were a couple of late signups. I have actually sent the links to the invitations or whatever to those people. So if we just allow just a minute or two to allow people to join without keeping anyone else wasting and waiting for too long, but there are still people trickling in. So just bear with us so that people don't miss that. As Andy says, we do have a few questions already. Thank you for people who sent those in. And during the presentation, because of the technology itself, it lends itself more to us presenting first and then taking questions afterwards. So please put that in the Q&A box that you will see on the webinar. If you just type in the question there, then it will pop up on Andy and my screen. And then we will read through the questions at the end of the webinar and then attempt to answer as best we can those questions. If we don't know the answer, or if we need to go and validate something, then certainly we will follow up with a specific answer post the conference. I think it's true to say, Andy, that you will be publishing probably a link to the video of this afterwards, possibly.
Yes, there'll be a link that will come out, and we can email that to everybody. It'll also be on our website, and Louise, you can obviously put that on your own website and, and social media and so on.
Okay, that's good. All right, so I think we've allowed now a bit of time for people to log in and sign in. Welcome everyone, and thank you once again to Andy for the invitation. We're going to do this in two parts. I'm going to cover the more generic aspects of moving to Portugal and residency in Portugal, and specifically we're going to focus on the D7 visa, and we'll explain why in a second. But the first part will all be about how to make it here, and then Andy will cover some of the more technical aspects around the fiscal requirements and the financial requirements of this. So let me just see if I can page down here. Right, so the routes to residency in Portugal today are fairly well structured and well defined. They broadly fall into one of two categories for obvious reasons. The first affects all EU nationals, so these are people who hold citizenship of an EU country and that can benefit from the freedom of movement that comes with inclusion and as defined by the EU. So we always recommend to people who are looking at moving to a place like Portugal to look at options, and the first option should always be the EU residency route. And what I mean by that is people should consider whether they can obtain a second nationality. For example, they may have an Ancestry Visa that allows them to access the Portuguese citizenship and therefore the Portuguese nationality. They may have a spouse, for example. I'll talk about that in a second, that has a nationality. So even though they may not have an EU passport, sometimes it is worth exploring, especially if this is something that you're planning to do in the future. It's worthwhile exploring your possible access to EU citizenship, which then gives you the right to freedom of movement. There are a couple of specific cases and examples in the case of Portugal. For example, the Sephardic Jewish Ancestry Visa, which is I say fast track, but I don't think anyone should be under any illusion that anything happens very quickly, but it is supposedly a fast track, but certainly a direct route into citizenship for anyone with Sephardic and proven Sephardic Jewish ancestry. And then we have a process in the country called reagrupamento familiar, which is basically family regrouping, and that allows the direct family members, this can be spouses, partners, as long as you can prove that it is a civil partnership that has existed for a certain minimum amount of time, immediate descendants and immediate ascendants, all these can be grouped into a family nucleus, if you will, that becomes in a sense dependent or associated with the main applicant, who is the EU citizen, and who obviously has the right to settlement. So that is something that people should consider, especially, for example, if you're a UK citizen or US citizen, Canadian citizen, but you're married to an EU citizen, then the route may well be that your spouse partner actually gets the residency and you tag on to them via this process of reagrupamento familiar. And then we have what we term third country nationals. These are people, anyone who is no longer, or I'm talking specifically about the UK, or clearly who's no longer, but anyone who's outside the EU. By far the most popular option currently in terms of accessing residency in Portugal is what we term the D7 visa. Portugal has a range of visas, D7, D2, and so on and so forth. But the D7, which is an income-based visa, is by far the most popular option at the moment. And one of the reasons that it is because it can be accessed via a rental or a purchase of a property on the basis that you have to have somewhere to live. You can do so via rental or a purchase. And then second most popular, probably, and well known at least, is the golden visa. Now, many of you listening to this may well have heard that there were changes to the golden visa program that were implemented from the 1st of January this year. Without going into a lot of detail, but basically all the more popular areas, in terms the high density areas in Portugal, where there are more people per square meter resident in those areas, they no longer qualify for residential property. And we make this distinction because if you are an investor and you're looking to access residency in Portugal via an investment, the routes still, broadly speaking, exist. You can make a commercial investment, in a touristic investment, and so on, and the golden visa will still qualify. But many of the people with whom we speak are actually looking to move and live in Portugal. And it is in these situations and circumstances that you need to be quite careful, because the golden visa will not apply in those areas for residential property. So essentially, if you want to live full-time or near full-time, the golden visa won't apply in those areas. If you look at the map on the right of my slide, just to give you a sense of where these areas are, the gray areas mostly along the coast and a lot of sections of the Algarve, those are the high density areas. The red areas are low density areas within a high density municipality. So you can be in a high density municipality, but still get a golden visa if you target one of those red areas, because it is a particularly low density area within an otherwise high density one. And then the blue is it's all low density. So that's where the Portuguese government at the moment wants to channel its golden visa investments to the blue and to the red areas of the country. And then the point I wanted to make, which Andy will cover in detail, is the NHR status, and that is a tax status. It is not a residency status. Sometimes people become confused. So there is an order, and the reason I'm speaking first is because there is an order to these things. You must first have the right to reside in Portugal before you have the right or the opportunity to apply for specific and special tax statuses such as the NHR. So it's a layered situation where one precedes the other. Residency precedes special tax status, and wanted to make that point. So the other thing that people will consider in terms of moving to a country like Portugal, Spain is a similar thing, is whether you wish to rent or to buy. And we run a very simple table. It helps people to focus on their objective and to link their objective to the route to residency. And often there is a choice, especially if you are someone who, A, doesn't know the country very well, or B, is not quite sure exactly where you like to settle, whether you'll fit into the sort of lifestyle in a quiet place or in a busy place, and you need a bit of time. You'll need to make a decision as to whether to rent or to buy. And in that sense, what we say is there are some obvious situations where you should rent. For example, if you're not sure exactly what I've said, that the country is for you, or whether you want to trial the lifestyle, you might rent before buying. That's often a case. Conversely, if you've been a visitor for Portugal for 20 years, you go to the same place, you like the location, and you know it's there, you want to settle, then clearly for many people it makes sense to buy, because it takes out all the risk of not finding the right rental. You have a home that's yours, and so on and so forth. And so you can go down this table and look at the different scenarios and see where more or less you should be headed, or it's likely that you should be headed in terms of your route. If you have a part-year residence, rent. If you part your residence but you want to make some money or generate some income while you're not living there, then certainly buy, use the property when you're there and rent it out when you're not there. If you want a residency status coupled with an NHR, you can rent or buy, no problem whatsoever. The rental option will still, as long as you have a minimum number of days in country, the rental option is still very feasible for an NHR status, for example. And the other point that we often make is we have a lot of retirees or pre-retirees moving to places like Portugal and Spain. And if that is your situation and you feel, even though you may not need it at this stage, but if you feel that in the short, medium term, you may want the flexibility of having access to care later on where you might not be able to live independently, then clearly opting for a rental solution is probably more sensible, because you don't have to go through, the whole sort of selling a house type of thing before you can move into a care home in later life. A couple of very briefly differences between the D7 and the Golden Visa, bearing in mind that the residential Golden Visa now has changed significantly, as I pointed out. So the D7 as a residency option is applicable anywhere. You could settle anywhere in the country. There is no differentiation between high density, low density, whatever. You pick where you want to be, whereas the Golden Visa is region specific. The region will determine the eligibility of the Golden Visa product and a Golden Visa solution within a specific area. Rental or purchase, Golden Visa you can't rent. If you want to get the visa via the Golden Visa route, you've got to buy something, and the level will depend, as you can see below, the level will depend on where you are in the country. The D7, if you decide to buy, there is no minimum level. So you can buy something for 150,000, which would not be a Golden Visa threshold, but that doesn't matter because it's completely open as to the decision you take and where you go and how much you spend. The changes are expected. As we know, we've had them already on the Golden Visa. There are no changes expected on the D7 visa program at the moment that we're aware of. There are pre-requirements for both cases. You will have to prove you have no criminal record. You will have to prove obviously your identity. In the case of the D7, you have to prove your income, and so on and so forth. In the Golden Visa, you have to prove your source of funds. So there are requisites and prerequisites in each case that will allow you to then access these different statuses. And I said 10%, but there are different scenarios. The NHR, that is the standard slide we have. Andy will explain the differences of those, but the NHR status, it is almost always applicable for people who wish to apply for it in the D7, because typically people going the D7 route are people that are going to reside in the country. On the Golden Visa side, if you are one of those people that is going to buy the Golden Visa or invest in the Golden Visa, but spend very little time in country, then the NHR status will not apply, because clearly you're not meeting the minimum day threshold. Multiple properties doesn't really apply to D7, but in the Golden Visa, you can build a small portfolio if you wish. A couple of commercial properties, a couple of small resi properties, that's fine. And then we always talk about the risk of overpriced properties, a sort of buyer beware type scenario. Beware of that in the Golden Visa, especially because the Golden Visa is, and it is what it is. It is packaged up as a residency option, and so often it's not the cheapest of product, but it's there for a purpose, which is to help people obtain a Golden Visa. So be aware of the fact that if it's a specific bespoke Golden Visa product, then expect to pay a bit of a premium. If it's a product that is similar to other residential, for example, product, then make sure you do your homework and you compare like for like to make sure that you're not overpaying for something that next door would be a lot cheaper. So now a minute or so, 2 minutes on the D7 as a residency solution. Coming back to my definition of what it is. What is it? It's an income-based residency visa. You have to prove your income to prove, especially initially, that you will not be a burden on the state. So there will be a requirement in terms of the minimum income that you must prove as a multiple of the Portuguese minimum wage, for example. There will be a minimum amount of deposit that you will have to make in a Portuguese bank account. Your Portuguese bank account, by the way. It's not as though the government is asking you to deposit money in their account and then they're managing it for you. It's your account, but they just want to make sure that there's a comfort level, in a sense, that you've actually moved money into the country and that you're covering your expenses for a reasonable amount of time. Again, I emphasize this time and again. The D7 visa can be obtained either via property purchase with no minimum value. You buy what you can afford and where and at the level of the prices of the properties in the areas you wish, or a long-term residential rental contract. Okay, so there are some, depending on where you're arriving from, for example, slight difference between Scotland and England in terms of the way the consulates are approaching the rental contracts. I sense at the moment, and in some countries, for example, South Africa versus the US. South Africa, they still were until quite recently accepting 6-month rental contract, whereas in the US, from September, they've stopped doing that and are accepting only 1-year contracts. So you need to be, even the information we have is sometimes outdated because the consulates are always updating this, but the principle is you can access the D7 visa with a rental contract, and the length of that rental contract you need to check with your local consulate to see exactly what they are accepting. It can be combined with tax programs, as I've explained, and Andy will, and the application, very important, must be done from the country of origin. You can't be sort of on holiday in Portugal and then convert to a D7 visa. That does not work. You need to go to the country in which you've resided at least for the last 12 months. And a practical consideration of this is typically you need a criminal certificate from that country of residence. Note, not citizenship, residence at least. And that's not easy to get when you're abroad. You need to go to a local entity, wherever it is, in Colombia, in India, or in Australia, wherever it is, and get that information. What are the challenges? Because this is a practical consideration for many people who say, well, I want to do this. This seems right for me. But although we don't consider it particularly bureaucratic, it's not 100% simple. There are steps required, and you do need to bring together information. So this is it's very important to be aware of these potential pitfalls. Firstly, it requires gathering different information and data, and not all of it is easy to understand. And sometimes you will need to involve an expert of sorts in helping you collate that information or deliver the bit of data or bit of preparatory work that is required. COVID-19 travel restrictions, even though they seem to be easing, generally speaking, in terms of travel, but they are tightening in terms of vaccination. Boosters, we're now talking, and I'm a living sort of example of this, battling around with the timing of boosters and when people need to be boosted and how they, what they're valid. France is only valid for a certain number of times. Spain have just limited that. We're not quite sure what Portugal is going to do. So you need to, the difficulty generally in being able to travel freely and easily to sort out things on the ground mean that sometimes you need to work with someone local who can help you at a distance, putting in place some of the building blocks. You also need to be aware of the fact that many of the service providers that you may be looking for are local or regional, and that's particularly not helpful if you are one of those people that is still undecided about where you're looking to settle. We always say this: if you're uncertain of where you want to settle, then we recommend that you work with someone who has a national coverage, because it will mean that effectively that person or that organization can assist you pretty much anywhere where you land up in the country, rather than saying, well, I want a Porto specialist and then I might need a Tavira specialist. That isn't as efficient if you're uncertain of where you want to settle, in the end. Be aware that follow-up may be slow, difficult, and language barriers may exist. I mean, English is widespread and well spoken, especially by firms and people that are accustomed to dealing internationally. But I think two things today that are more relevant than they were a little while ago. The first is everyone is extremely busy. It's incredible when we talk to our partners, our business partners, and so on, whether it be on the services side, the real estate side, accommodation, everyone is swamped with work. And as a result of that, it means that the response time is slow. And we fall often as a company into the same, in a sense, trap. We try to tell people our lead time is 3 days, 4 days, or whatever it is, but we ask people to bear with us because people are busy. And then the second thing is that there is almost starting to be a sort of filtering mechanism that is happening with service providers because they are so busy. And so be aware of the fact that sometimes when people are not responding, it's because they actually sense something in your inquiry that leads them to believe that perhaps they shouldn't spend any time with you. I know it's very callous to say, but it is happening with noticing with a number of firms that they're almost sort of cherry picking the responses. So please, we always say this to people, please be open about sharing information because the companies that then are responding back will share information back to you. And that's important in terms of making sure your process goes well. Portuguese consulates apply rules inconsistently, and assistance varies considerably. So you may, I'll give you an example. The US is a good one. We've 4 or 5 consulates, I forget now, but you could have great stories about Washington and a poor story about New York. With all due respect to New York, I didn't want to single out New York, whatever it is. At the moment, San Francisco is closed because there's a COVID. Staff have been affected by COVID, so they're not processing. So people may have reason to complain about that. So some consulates, you know, as I was mentioning, Scotland may approve a 6-month contract. London and Manchester may only approve a 12-month contract. Johannesburg may approve a 9-month, and Cape Town may approve, you know, a 12-month. Whatever. I'm making it up a little bit here, but you get the sense of what I'm saying. Don't believe everything you read on social media because people will often describe the context of their own experience, which may actually be in the past, and the rules may often have changed. So it's really important to talk to someone on the ground. Even if they are not 100% up to speed with the changes, they will guide you as to the right questions to ask. And then seasonality, absolutely crucial. You would not believe, those of you listening, how many people are asking, I'll use a specific example, are asking to move to Portugal between May and September of this year. Well, that is a horrible time to start looking for a long-term rental. It's the peak of the summer season. Everyone has lost 2 years of COVID tourism revenue. They want to make this revenue back by renting by the week. And suddenly we've got all these people requesting for a September, a June starter. My child is going to school in September. I want to start in August. Well, people are going to make 5,000 euros in August in summer rental. Why would they rent a house for 1,500 euros in August, you know, to someone? So please be aware that this process of applying for something involves several factors, and it's really important that you're working with someone on the ground who understands the constraints of these kind of things. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out in terms of the D7 is, notwithstanding everything I've said, there are many things that can be done at a distance, like getting your fiscal number, getting fiscal representation, opening a bank account, getting insurance, opening a Forex account. These are all things that can be done from your country of residence well in advance, and they will save you time later on. So consider those. Now, I know this is a very busy, detailed slide, but I'm going to try and make the point as succinctly as I can, which is the following. All of you, without exception, at some point, some of you may have already overcome this phase of the process, and others will still need to encounter it or deal with it. But you will need to ask yourself a series of questions around to which you need key answers around where you want to settle and you know, whether your budget stretches and whether the area is a match or whatever. And what we encourage people to do is ask those series of questions. We've put up several that we ask, and you should be asking these questions yourself or getting someone on the ground to help guide you through this process. And I've included a small example at the bottom, color-coded example, to give you the kind of thing that we often do as a business with people that are looking for answers, and that is to guide them through the options that are available based on their priorities. So this was an example of a client who wanted to generate income in the summer and in the winter without an annual contract. They wanted a traditional property in a sort of historical medieval town. They wanted to be walking distant to amenities, preferably in a wine region. They wanted good access to seafood and some water views in the property, and they wanted expat communities in the winter. So those were their key criteria. And when you and they, in their mind, they had already shortlisted, if I can call that, although it's a fairly long list, shortlisted a few regions. And what we did is a quick analysis. It really doesn't need to be very sophisticated, but it requires someone who knows the country. A quick analysis of how each of their own regions stacked up. So if you look, the first thing visually is that there were a few regions that had several red bits in it. So if you went to central Portugal or you went to the Alentejo, for example, in each of those cases, there will be 3 to 4 negative points that would work against those regions. So in the case of Coimbra, ability to generate income in the summer and winter without an annual contract. In the winter, very difficult. Obviously, no seafood or very more difficult seafood because Coimbra is inland, and expat communities in the winter, still not too big in Coimbra, as an example. So what we can easily do, and when say we or anyone who's more of an expert and knowledgeable of the market, what they can help you do is to reduce and eliminate some of these options right from the start and at a distance. So you do not spend your time or the time of anyone else who's already quite busy on the ground looking in places that you shouldn't. Okay, so there are a number of factors which apply, and work with someone if preferable to help you work through that. And then a little bit about us. So we were founded in 2014. We focus on mainly IRM, which is this thing called international retirement migration, which is people moving around from one place to another, primarily pre-retirees or retirees, although we work a lot with families, investors, and the like. And then we have our headquarters in the UK, but we deal with several regional markets, Portugal, Spain. We have ambassadors all over the place, and multilingual teams located pretty much all around Portugal. We deal with around 30 nationalities of actual clients, people who land up working with us on something, whether it's discovering the country, renting something, purchasing something, doesn't matter. We have many, many years of experience in these areas, in particular D7. We've been working with that almost since the onset in around 2015 or so. And we're very neutral in the sense of working with both rentals and purchases. We don't really mind which route clients take. And because we cover the country, we also cover huge range of budgets. We have rentals from as low as probably around 500 euros, although those go very, very quickly, to massive budgets of big villas, and then property sales, sometimes small plots of land, all the way through to big mansions as well. So very, very broad range of offerings. And the key thing in terms of what we do, and Andy and Holborn are a good example of the kind of partners with whom we work. We have a really good range of network of specialist partners who come to the table and bring to the table that specific expertise, whether it be subject matter expertise or whether it be geographic regional expertise. That's very much our business model. And then we collate a lot of data from you. We like to hear from you and hear what how you've done it, how you've gone about it, your aspirations. And we run, I think it's probably Portugal's largest ongoing online survey. It's called the Living in, Moving or Retiring to Portugal survey. And we have thousands of responses that we collate over the years. We'll probably be relaunching that again over the next month or so for this year. But it gives us some insights into how you think and what you're looking for in terms of support. So that's a little bit on us. And now I'm going to hand over to Andy, who will cover his section, and then we'll take questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Luis. I'll just get the presentation up. Just while I'm doing that, just to say that, NHR is quite a wide area. I'm going to touch on it in my presentation, but if anybody has any questions whatsoever, we will cover them at the end. My presentation isn't exhaustive on NHR or any other area. It's really just a a taster and a flavour of the kind of things that we do. So feel free to type your questions in the box, and we'll cover them at the end. So just share my screen. Hopefully people can now see that. Okay, so imagine you've decided to move to Portugal. You've got your visa, you've booked flights, and hopefully you've conversed with Luis on your property options. And maybe you're going to apply for non-habitual residency status too. So what else should you be considering from a financial point of view? So my name is Andy Southgate. As I said, I am the European Senior Partner for Holborn Assets. I'm going to guide you through some of the issues you'll need to address if and when you decide to move to Portugal. Firstly, I will just take you through a little bit about the company. We're an international firm of independent financial advisors and tax planners. We do have offices all over the world, as you can see in the slide that's on the screen at the moment. So we are in the EU, which is where I am. I'm talking to you from Portugal today. We also have offices in the UK, the USA, in Asia, in places like Hong Kong and Vietnam, also in the Middle East, in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and South Africa. We've also just expanded into Australia in the last few weeks, although that's not on the slide in front of you. We do have about $2 billion US that we look after for our clients all over the world. So that's a bit about the company. So what is it that we actually do for our clients, and what do we help with? Well, it's all on the screen in front of you now, but essentially what we do is provide them with a financial roadmap for when they're coming to Portugal. And I'll be taking you through some further detail on that today as we run through. As I said earlier, it's not exhaustive, and really it's just a taster. So please feel free to sort of get in touch in the Q&As, or afterwards I'll provide my contact details. And then, we can tailor any further discussions to your specific circumstances and situation. So look, non-habitual residencies we've touched on, it provides some absolutely fantastic tax benefits. For example, 10% on pension income that you may receive, but they are not all encompassing, and it's likely that people will have to restructure their finances when they move to Portugal. So Portugal, like almost every other country in the world, taxes you on your worldwide income and gains. So the UK also does that, as does pretty much everywhere else. And one mistake I keep seeing people make is that they fall into the trap of thinking that their income, their gains, or their assets are actually subject to tax in the country in which those assets are held. That's definitely not the case. So you do need to take care and plan to restructure your finances accordingly. One thing I will cover off is, and it's saying on there, is do not try and cheat the system. The reason I'm saying that is that 30 or 40 years ago, historically this wasn't the case. It was very, very easy to get away with not paying any tax if you moved to somewhere like Portugal or Spain. There were no international agreements in place. There was no sharing of information in place, and many people could and did get away with not declaring income, assets, capital gains, and so on that arose from other countries. There are now international automatic exchange of information agreements in place, and basically you will be caught. The last 3 or 4 years, it's really tightened up. I've been in the Iberian Peninsula. This is year 8 for me living here. Basically never really saw anybody get caught for this kind of stuff in the first few years. And then the last 2 or 3 years, it's become extremely common. Just a bit of a warning. If you do things correctly, you've got absolutely nothing to worry about whatsoever. But please do make sure that you declare everything correctly when you come here. So look, paying too much tax will obviously impact on your lifestyle, and non-habitual residency will not cover everything off. So what we'll look at in just a second is that many assets in Portugal are actually taxed at 28%. So we'll go through some examples of how you can reduce that. to around 3% or even lower as we move along. But firstly, what kind of assets do people actually leave behind in their country of origin? I mean, I've talked somewhat a little bit about the UK here, but this is applicable anywhere in the world, really. So what assets do people leave behind, and how are they taxed under the non-habitual residency regime? So in the UK, for example, we have something called ISIS. So if you're in the UK, you'll probably be familiar with those. They're taxed at 28% in Portugal without any allowances whatsoever. So they're, if you've got assets and they're making a profit, there is no capital gains tax allowance in Portugal at all, as you may be used to elsewhere. It's just a flat 28%. Same with shares, again, 28%, no allowances. Same with investment funds, that's 28%. Same as bonds as well, it's all 28%. If there is anybody on this webinar that has a trust, is a beneficiary of a trust, receives income from a trust, which may or may not be the case, the situation is even worse. It's still 28% if it's, for example, the UK, or 35% if it's an offshore arrangement. But regardless of whether or not you've actually made a profit or not, so you could actually be sat in a loss-making position, receive some money from a trust arrangement, and still pay 28 or 35% in that loss-making position, which is absolutely incredible. Obviously, that tells you a lot about how Portugal views trusts, and if you do have any of these assets, probably worth having a conversation with me about how we can help you. One other further point on this slide: income and gains arising from any blacklisted jurisdictions that Portugal has on its list, which are generally tax havens around the world. So I've given a couple of examples there: Channel Islands, Gibraltar, the Cayman Islands, Isle of Man would be included, British Virgin Islands, and so on. They do not benefit from any exemptions at all, okay, under the non-habitual residency regime. So if you did have any assets or pensions or income from any of those jurisdictions, again, it's worth having a conversation with me about how we might be able to help you get out of those jurisdictions, for example, before you made the move, so as to avoid any nasty surprises later on down the line. So how can you actually reduce tax, beyond non-habitual residency? A lot of the clients that we deal with at Holborn actually come to Portugal either in the years coming up to their retirement, or at retirement, in retirement, and they want to know how they can actually get through retirement as tax efficiently as possible. So I've just given an example here. It's in pounds sterling, but that doesn't particularly matter. It could be euros, it could be US dollars. The principle of it is exactly the same. So imagine you have an investment portfolio of £500,000 in pounds sterling, and you made a gain of that on 10%, which would obviously be 50,000. How would Portugal tax that? Well, it's quite simple. It's 28%, so 14,000 in tax. However, if you invested into a Portuguese tax compliant account, given the same example, same gain, actually the way that Portugal treats this is that you would actually only be taxed on the equivalent amount of the gain made, which is 10% of the 50,000 gain. So in this example, that would be 5,000, obviously, which would then be taxable at 28%. So that's 1,400 in tax. So you've just reduced your tax liability from 14,000 in this example sterling down to 1,400. That would be the same in whatever currency you were looking at. So in percentage terms, you've just gone from 28% tax down to 2.8% in tax. So you've got to think of the difference that could make to your lifestyle if you're living here in Portugal. So that's an example of how we can reduce tax. You'll also need to think about, non-habitual residency lasts for just 10 years. Most people that move here, if you're moving here at whatever point in your life, most of my clients tend to move here late 50s, early 60s, some a bit younger, some a bit older. But you need to think about what happens 10 years down the line. So, tax on pensions after 10 years can go from actually 10% right the way up to as high as 48%, depending on the level of income you're actually receiving. However, Portuguese compliance accounts actually experience a reduction in tax the longer that you hold them. And so after 5 years, the tax drops down to 80% of the taxable amount that you receive. And after 8 years, it drops down to 40%. of the taxable amount that you receive. So in the example that I gave in the previous slide, we had made a 50,000 gain. The amount of tax you pay is actually reduced even further if you hold the account for 8 years, down to just over 1%. In my example, 40% of £1,400, which works out as £560. So as you may remember from the previous slide, I was talking about initially paying tax of around £14,000 on that gain. After 8 years, you could reduce that down to just £560. So it's a really good way of reducing your tax liability over time. Okay. Now, this presents a really great planning opportunity for people that actually have a pension and also some savings and investments. Some of you may have already worked out what that is, but I'll go through it as well. It's what you do is you place your savings and investments into a Portuguese compliant account and essentially leave it there for ideally the full 10 years, but at least 8 years until your non-habitual residency status actually ends. During that time, obviously, you would have the chance to significantly grow from the initial amount that you would put in there. And in the meantime, what you would do is try and take your income entirely from the pension during that first 10-year period and only pay 10% in tax. After that 10 years is up, you can then either just completely turn off the income from your pension and not receive it anymore, or lower it and take money from the Portuguese compliant account and only pay 1 or 2% in tax on the withdrawals you make. So that's a really great way to actually reduce your tax bill here in Portugal over time. So do talk to us about planning for 10 years down the line, because you will get there when you move here. Just before we move on to sort of the end of my presentation, and then we can go into the Q&As, some other issues I just want to flag up with people to make you aware of. If you are in the UK or anywhere outside of the European Union and you're thinking of moving here to Portugal and you have an advisor, they will not be able to advise you once you move. Particularly relevant to the UK because of Brexit. Obviously, the UK is no longer part of the European Union, and since that happened, it's meant that a lot of people in the EU have lost access to their advisor. You simply can't have the regulatory permissions to operate here anymore. Estate planning and wills as well is a really big one. Look, if you don't have an estate plan or a will, unfortunately, what I can tell you is that Portugal will have one for you, but you're probably not going to like that. There is a rule here called forced heirship, which essentially means, in broad terms, that you do not get to choose who inherits your assets, which obviously could cause quite serious complications for a lot of people. There are ways around that, especially if you're from another European country, but there are still ways around it regardless of where you're from. So again, come and talk to us if you feel you've got issues on that. If you're from the UK and you're thinking of moving here, I know I mentioned earlier that where you get taxed and where you pay your taxes is predominantly based on where you live, rather than where the assets themselves or the income is coming from. That's actually quite different, and this is where tax gets a little bit confusing and complicated. When you pass away, actually that doesn't matter so much anymore. It's more about where your estate is and where you were originally domiciled. It becomes a really complicated area, but for most people moving here, if you're coming from the UK, it's very, very likely that UK inheritance tax is going to apply to your worldwide assets, okay? Again, you can plan for that. There are things you can do to mitigate entirely that situation. The scope of this presentation isn't designed to cover all of that off, but please do flag it up if you feel it's going to be an issue. In terms of wills, whether you're UK or somewhere else, always keep your wills separate from Portugal. So if you're coming to Portugal to live, have a Portuguese will for your Portuguese assets. And if you're, for example, in the UK, keep your UK assets separate and have a UK will, or whether that's South Africa, whether it's the US, it doesn't matter. Just make sure they're separate, because the two things don't really interact very well, and it's very difficult for the people you leave behind to sort that mess out if you haven't done it properly. Finally, again, if you're coming from the UK, the Department of Work and Pensions, the DWP, are able to actually pay you your state pension in euros into your Portuguese account directly. That's a pretty good thing. because A, it saves you the hassle of having to have it received in sterling and then converting it, and B, it's actually a commission-free transaction at the spot rate on the day, so you'll get the best available rate you can possibly get, and much better than anything you'll ever get on the open market using currency brokers or online tools and all of that stuff. So that's a really nice thing to have. So that's the end of my presentation. You've got my contact details there on the screen. So if you've got a pen and paper, you want to note those down quickly. If you do want to get in touch with me, that would be fantastic. But now we're going to move on to a Q&A session. We did have some questions that came in advance, which Luis and I will tackle together. If anybody else has any other questions, please do type them into the chat box, and we'll cover those off as well. So thanks very much for listening, and we'll move on to the Q&A.
I think so. There's one here, Andy, on the chat. Will a land-only purchase qualify for a D7 visa, or is a property defined as a house, villa, apartment? In brief, the latter. You need to be able to live in the property, and you need to be able to do things such as deliver posts to the property, or alternative and so on, and it must be your fiscal residence. So don't ask me about what sort of mechanisms they use, but if they were to check, then they would fail the test. So it does need to be a habitable building or location. Just some of the other questions that had come in. I think this one is for you, Andy. So timings around registering for tax in Portugal and deregistering in the UK. Is there a normal timeline, and how best to plan? I know that's various questions, but maybe you want to handle that one.
Yeah. So when you exit the UK as a tax resident, you're not legally required to even tell HMRC in the UK. It's not a thing. There is a form available for you to tell them that you've exited, and that form is called P85, so P85. You can fill it in, it's voluntary, and that will inform HMRC of the date that you cease to become a tax resident in the UK. The way Portugal views it is that if you are coming here on a visa of some kind, you would treat it as tax resident from the day of your arrival. And Portugal actually splits the tax year. So to explain to you in a bit more detail what that means, I'll give you an example, which is my own example. I moved here in October in a year, and that meant that Portugal discounted every single month prior to October of my arrival. So the Portuguese tax year runs January to December, which is obviously completely different to the UK, which runs April to April. Portugal essentially discounted that January to October period, and then I was liable for tax from October to December, and then the following year became with a full 12 months. So that's the way Portugal splits the tax year. In terms of timings, are there any particular timings? Really, that would depend on your individual situation and tax position. In some cases, quite a lot of cases, it may well be quite advantageous to people to get rid of assets prior to coming to Portugal, to make use of the allowances available in their own countries. That's something I'd need to get into specifics of an individual circumstances in order to be able to provide decent advice on that. But the bottom line is that timing is very, very important. So it's a good question. It's just impossible for me to cover off every single potential scenario that may exist around that. So I would encourage whoever's asked that question for them to get in touch with me. I'll be more than happy to cover that off with you face to face or on a Zoom and so on. But the bottom line is timing is incredibly important, especially on exiting rather than arriving. So yeah.
Just to add to what Andy said, I think the one thing which is linked to this NHR is just on a factual basis. You have any NHR applicant has until March of the year after they start or declare their residency to actually apply for NHR, right, Andy?
Yeah, so it's the March, yeah. But so if again, you could just go back to my example, just it's real, and I can give you the practicalities of it. So you move here in October, you've got until the following March to apply for NHR. That's it. So if you moved here in April, for example, it would still be the following March, and so on and so on.
Yeah. But you can do it. I mean, you can do it as soon as you arrive, for example.
Oh yeah. You could do it immediately. It would have no benefit in that initial sort of bit, but it's then the following tax year that it would take effect. Very simple application. You could get most accountants will do it for you, but it's very easy. It's not many forms to fill in or anything like that, and it's really quite simple. And you either meet the criteria for it or you don't.
You don't.
And that's it.
Okay, good. Right, let me. I'm picking up both on the chat and the previous ones. So NHR. There was a question about NHR, but I think we've covered that. Best timing, I think, Andy, you've answered the fact that it is individual. There was a question, it wasn't quite a question, but it's just a person that said retirement pension from international organization. Not quite sure what the question was, but is there any specific point about a pension being from an international?
Yeah, and I've also just noticed a question from, I think, Arvin Rodriguez as well on pensions. So I'll try and cover these two things off in one. The international organization one, I would need more details on which international organization. Some international organizations, if you're receiving a pension from them, they will find that is actually tax-free throughout the European Union, depending on the type of pension. I wouldn't want to commit any further than that at this point without knowing the specifics. So if somebody can provide, whoever asked that question, if you've got the specifics of your circumstances, more than happy to have a chat with you about it. But generally, international organizations, if we're talking about places like, I don't know, the European Union, for example, sometimes those pensions can be completely tax-free. In terms of Arvin's question, can a UK pension, a SIP with a private provider, be transferred to Portugal? Yes, it can be transferred. Are there any benefits? Frankly, there are not too many benefits other than actually you could maintain a SIP, actually, but move it to, rather than a UK focused SIP, there's something now called an international SIP, which is still in the UK. But the interesting thing about that is it's got a multi-currency option within it. And obviously that allows you to switch between, for example, pounds sterling and euros. So you can actually receive your income in euros. So if it's a beneficial time to convert from sterling to euros, which at the moment, actually, based on the last few years, it is quite beneficial because we've had a really weak sterling, and now sterling has improved quite greatly against the euro over the last 6 months or so. So now may be an opportune time to move sterling to euros based on the exchange rate. And that's really one of the main benefits that would entail. Other than that, moving out of a SIP to a different provider comes with very few benefits indeed. So it really just be about maintaining that SIP in most cases. There are other reasons you could move, such as lowering the charging structure. Again, I would have to speak to people individually about that. But yeah, there's international SIPs probably not a bad idea in broad terms, but I wouldn't want to sort of give specific advice on it without knowing the ins and outs. Let's have a look at some of the other questions here. What Wi-Fi later in the year? Planning on marketing sales of our pending market. Okay.
Okay, so let me just read that out. I'm not sure who sees these questions, but wife and I are planning to move to Portugal later in the year, pending marketing sales of our house here in the UK. Intention is to rent first, probably somewhere near Óbidos area, which is in the Silva coast, by the way, for those who don't know. My sister lives in Lisbon. Could certainly use some personal guidance and advice as we start to put more color into the planning. Yes, and having grown up in the Rainbow Nation, coloring in is what we do. So feel free to be, I don't know if my contacts were on there or not, but we'll get them out somehow to you. If you want to be in touch with us, then one of the team will run you through that. We'll send you this questionnaire, fill in the questions or the answers to the questions, and then we'll certainly start to help. What I would say, just emphasize again, is that even though you're starting to sort of fill in the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, please do consider that question about starting to tackle some of the tasks well in advance. And I emphasize it again, things like the fiscal number. Really, you know, there are cheap, almost sort of online options to do this, and they can be done remotely. Opening a bank account it can be a low stress option. We got several sort of remote based or banks that would do this remotely. So there are things you can still do as long as you know that your decision is to move to Portugal. There will be building blocks you will require. Just like Andy, I mean, hugely suggest that you ask someone like Andy to help you through the planning, but on the basic, let's say, operational bits like having a fiscal number and a bank account, you can certainly do that in advance, and you should.
Yeah, I just to add to that, I mean, personally, I did my own bank account. Actually, if you're in the UK, you can actually just go into a Portuguese branch in London. Portuguese banks have branches in London. If you're close to London, or you're maybe going down there for some other reason, you can just make an appointment there and open the account. You can email them in advance, book an appointment, walk in and get it done. Get it all done in the UK, and even have all your Portuguese bank cards and everything else sent to your UK address prior to even leaving the country. So it's
and just give you an idea. I mean, a step on from that. One is there are three options. One is do it in Portugal. The other one is do it in a bank, as Andy says, that has a representative office. And especially during COVID, a lot of the Portuguese banks, even though they didn't do retail banking, so you couldn't kind of have an account in London. You were actually a Portuguese account. What they were doing is facilitating the opening of Portuguese account. But what they did is, you know, that you had to go in. Now there are even some banks where you can do this remotely. I mean, I split my time between Portugal and the UK, and I opened one of my accounts remotely. They did all my validation using video, checking out my eyes and I don't know what else, you know, and showing my documents and whatever. So you can literally do everything remotely without losing, you know, without leaving your house in Manchester or in you know, Norwich or wherever it is, it may be in, you know, Glasgow, wherever it may be in the country. Yeah.
Just saying, Rob has just asked a supplementary question there. Any bank recommendations? From my point of view, Rob, I did it with BCP Millennium, which have a branch in London, and I did it there. Would I say they were any good? I only really use it online. I've never had any reason whatsoever to go into an actual physical Portuguese location. Everything I need to do can be done on their website very easily and very simply, in the same way as it would be with a UK bank, if that's what you're used to. It's all in English as well. They've got an English language version of the site. It's very simple, very easy. So I can't complain about that. All the other major banks you would expect are here, like Santander is here, and you hear varying different reports. I think the main complaint I've heard from other people that I know is it's a different story when you go into branches compared to doing it online. And that would be my...
Yeah. I think there's also a few differences. I mean, we do this a lot, and we've moved our recommendations over the years, or our referrals over the years, from banks to banks, you know, as their structures have changed. For example, within the BCP group, so Millennium is part of the BCP group, but it has what we consider a medium cost, a monthly cost. You can go for I've now got a total blank. The free online bank option. Goodness. I will pick out. So I've just got a blank, and I've just opened an account with them, but it's all online. So the zero cost. So you get a €7 or €15 per month with Millennium type thing. So Santander we find a bit cheaper than that. They have a €3 to a €5 range cost. We have a banca, for example, that is a Spanish bank that does it all remotely. They have a lower cost and online setup, but they don't have much retail presence. We have this other one, and this must be, of course, my young age now, completely forgetting the name, but we have this other bank that is cost-free. There are no charges, no monthly cost whatsoever. The app works great. Even when you go into one of the few branches, they actually call you to the counter via the app and so on. So yeah, so if you drop us an email, we'll send you a couple of options and you can pick one.
Yeah, Thank you, Rob.
Activo Bank, thank you. Activo Bank, thank you.
Okay. There's another question here. Is Portugal provide income tax holiday for some years for people which move to Portugal from the UK and have Portuguese citizenship? I don't believe so if you have citizenship, because I don't see how you can be classed as non-habitual residents. So basically the answer to that is probably no.
As a Portuguese citizen, I can tell you you're top of the target list in terms of getting their tax. You've got your NIF, and after your NIF, they will.
Yeah. So no is the answer to that question. Sorry about that. I don't think we have any more questions, do we?
I don't think we do.
Anybody else have a question? If so, please ask it now. Otherwise, I think we're done.
Yeah, I think that's it. I don't have any other. Okay. Oh, hang on. There's something we just see here. Oh no, that came up. Oh, here we go. There are a few in the Q&A. Sorry. So one more there, and also in the Q&A, there's from Alexander. What are the challenges for a US citizen couple who doesn't or don't have regular income but has several million in liquid assets? Yeah, in answer to that question, just a quick answer on this one. One assumes from the question that you have no other nationality, so only US, which means in terms of access to Portugal, in this case, you will have to apply for a visa. There are two broad solutions. And again, this is not a definitive answer because, again, it depends on personal circumstances and also, in this case, on the flexibility of the consulate in question. But one is to take those liquid assets and to turn them into a regular revenue stream. And so talking to someone like Andy is probably a good solution in terms of figuring out how to do that. And what we've seen with similar cases in the past is that longevity and proof of this income stream over time is important. In other words, if you decide you're moving to Portugal tomorrow, of course I'm exaggerating, and you suddenly change this into some sort of interest-bearing account that trickles out a sort of a pension-like payment every month. If you've only had it for 1 month, it's not going to be very convincing. There needs to be some sort of history of this entity or this mechanism delivering up some regular income. That's point number one. Point number two is that on the D7 visa application, we do know of applicants who've been successful. And what they do is they in their motivation letter of motivation, which is accompanies the application, they describe that, and they do 2 or 3 things. One is they bolster their deposits into their Portuguese account by more, so they deposit more money and show the authorities, the consular authorities, that they've actually deposited more money. Okay, so that they're proving that, and then they describe in quite some level of detail, which some people may not be comfortable with, exactly what those assets are. Okay, so they include that in an application, and we've had several people that have actually been approved on this basis. Okay,
I was myself actually, Luis, to answer that, with a very low amount, nothing like a couple of million. I mean, I do have work. Obviously, I'm working here. But actually, I did come into Portugal on the D7, and with a very small amount in my Portuguese bank account at the time, and it was the Portuguese consulate themselves that told me how much to put in to get it approved. So I mean, there are issues you need to face, Alexander, but they are, in broad terms, without trying to be flippant about it or anything, if you've got several million in liquid assets, Portugal wants you here, paying tax and spending money. That's essentially it. Portugal is a very, barring any other issues that we may not know about, Portugal is very welcoming indeed for people who are coming here to retire, spend money, and so on. So I mean, I don't really see that there are any actual challenges that would be insurmountable in a general sense. I think it would be very, very straightforward to do that.
Yeah, correct. There's another question about Paulo. I'm a Portuguese citizen living abroad, South Africa, for 50+ years. do I qualify for the NHR program, having been away all that time and never been registered for tax in PT? Simple answer to that is yes. And how will I be taxed on my SA pension? I believe we cannot be double taxed. I don't know. Andy,
Yeah, well, I don't think you do qualify for NHR.
oh, definitely yes.
Because you're a Portuguese citizen, so no.
No, can I just disagree with you on that?
Okay, yeah, sure.
I'm not sure. We maybe need to clarify this, but NHR, as long as you haven't been resident for the last 5 years.
Oh, is it 5 years? Sorry, I didn't know.
Correct.
Okay,
yeah. So as long as you, so Portuguese citizens on the NHR here, they qualify. So I'll just give you an example. We've just mentioned Millennium. One of the senior directors at Millennium Bank actually came from the UK and came back to Portugal and obtained the NHR. The key thing, it's absolutely crucial, is that you must not have been a tax resident in Portugal for the last 5 tax years. Okay, that's absolutely crucial. So in this case, one would assume that because you've been outside the country for 50 years, even you have your NIF is probably as a foreign resident, and therefore you've been away for 5 years at least, and you can apply. So any national, as long as you've been away for 5 years at least, continuous tax years, Portuguese tax years, then in theory, if you meet the other small criteria, you should be able to apply. Yeah.
Okay. To cover off the pension part, the answer to that is it depends on the type of pension. If it is treated as a kind of what they call a personal pension, then and you do qualify for NHR, then it's 10%, as I said in the presentation, for the first 10 years. Subsequently, would then be subject to normal Portuguese income tax rates after that. However, if it were to be treated as a government pension, it would depend on the terms of the double taxation treaty between South Africa and Portugal. I haven't looked at that double taxation treaty, but it would be very likely that any government pensions would be taxable in South Africa and not in Portugal at all. I can't say that's a definitive answer, but that would be most likely. Most double taxation treaties do have that rule in there, that if it's government pensions, it's taxed in the country of origin. I can't see the reason why South Africa and Portugal would not have that clause. But if you want to research that, you'll be able to obtain a copy of the double taxation treaty online in English. They're all published, they're all publicly available documents, and it'll be easy to read up on that. But if you want some assistance with it and some actual advice, again, we can organise tax advice for you. So get in touch.
And I think there's one last question, Andy, which I see it's from Cheryl. If you have Portuguese ancestry, does that affect anything?
By ancestry, you just mean antecedents, presumably.
I'm assuming the person means that somewhere in their past, someone has been Portuguese. I'm assuming the right maybe to nationality. I think it goes back. Again, this is not my area of expertise, but I think it goes back 1 or 2 generations, is it? If I'm not mistaken, that you could use. You could use. Yeah, I think it's 2 generations. Right.
But so yeah, and also if you had, I mean, I don't know the specifics of the circumstances here, but if you had somebody who was a direct family member still in Portugal, obviously that would change things under a grandfather and a
we're both from the I think, Cheryl, I think the answer is yes. We stand corrected. Both Andy and I hesitating a little bit on this one. You probably need a sort of a slightly more specialist advice, but I think we would guess that yes, there would be an advantage, and definitely, with an ancestry visa, you could claim citizenship on the basis of that. What I would do is I would definitely make contact with your local consulates. They have, I'm not sure exactly where you live at the moment, but they will, they normally have a helpline for Portuguese citizens living in the specific country, US, UK, South Africa, and so on. So Texas, yeah, in the US. just go directly to Washington, probably is covered. If you ask them the question, they then relay the question to, there is the equivalent of a SAF, I don't know who it'll be in the future, they're breaking that up, a SAF sort of department that sits in Porto, and those guys are actually very, very good. I've used them in the past myself, as a Portuguese person living abroad. They come back with very detailed answers and very specific, but they funnel those through the consulate. So please approach your consulate, ask the question with as much detail as possible. Don't worry about sounding silly or anything, and then get that through to them. And they normally have a fixed time within which they respond. And because it's all email online, they're normally quite good at responding within, within a kind of a week or so. That's my experience, at least.
I think somebody above as well has said, please, can we have a link to the recording of the session? Yes, you can. It'll be published on the Holborn Portugal's website. But also, if you would like me to send you the link, just send me an email to andrew.southgate@holbornassets.com, and I can email you the link once it's available. So I hope that answers that question for you.
Great. Fantastic. So I think, I don't think there are any more questions there, Andy.
Yeah, thanks to everybody for your attendance, and hope you enjoyed it and it was useful. Hopefully we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye now.